Hi there guys, welcome back to the channel. We're in a bit of a different situation today, as you can see. Welcome to my lovely kitchen. We're going to do something a bit different from the workshop videos that we've done before. We're going to look at the iConnectivity mio10 MIDI interface and patchbay. Now, I've been using fairly big MIDI interfaces on and off for a while. I've been battling with what I have, which is some old 90s tech. Running off an old Apple Mac for configuration. That was at some old mio10 hardware. Now, these large interfaces have been around for a while. They were much more popular back in the 90s and early noughties because there was a lot more studio hardware running on MIDI and stuff at the time. But there's been a bit of a resurgence of hardware synths and stuff like that in the studio recently. So these guys, iConnectivity, they're sort of fairly new on the block, but they've come out with this really nice interface, and I think it's going to do the things that I need it to do. Now, what those things are effectively hook up a whole bunch of synthesizers and other gear to my PC and to a couple of bits of hardware sequencing and that sort of stuff, and to be able to route around all of the MIDI messages, to be able to filter, to be able to switch configurations to different routing setups, etc., as I need it to do. And it also allows the connection of USB MIDI devices, class compliant MIDI devices on the USB, and it will recognize those and allow you to route in between those as well. I believe it gives you 56 virtual MIDI ports which are assigned to the various bits of hardware, and that hardware includes 2 connections for PCs on a USB B type, a USB A type as a USB host for connecting USB MIDI peripherals, and then there's also an Ethernet port which will do 4x4 RTP MIDI, and you also get 10 in, 10 out, old school 5-pin DIN MIDI. So I've just recently got this and I'm going to have a look at it now. I don't believe that it comes with very much, but no one else seems to have done much by way of video on this product, and I think it's a pretty decent product for the amount that you get it for. I paid just over £260 and I got it from Thomann just recently, and it was free shipping. So I don't believe it's out on general retail in the UK at the present moment. I'm hoping that it will be, because I'd really like to encourage more of these sorts of product out in the market, which shouldn't be expensive, but the ones that are on the market at the present moment, like the mio10 products, etc., they're not especially cheap. They're sort of a bit niche, but what with people using iPads and more hardware on stage and more hardware synthesizers and that sort of thing in the studio now, there's a bit more need for these things again, as there was in the 90s as well. So anyway, this is the thing. Let's have a look and see what you get. So, no knife required. So this is a rack mount unit, as you would expect. There are smaller interfaces that they do. This is the biggest, baddest one, which has all of the interfaces and all of the hardware and software for doing the routing and stuff. But a rack mount unit is what I was after as well, because it just means it's easier to effectively integrate this into the setup that I've got. We'll go into the studio in a little while and you'll see why that is. So, this is all very nice. Okay, so this has got the 3 ins and outs on the front, activity lights for 16 ports worth. We'll find out if those are assignable. Some connection lights for the 2 PCs, the USB and the Ethernet, and I'm guessing that's a general purpose MIDI activity light. Don't know what the button does yet. It may be a power button, but we'll find out. On the back we've got the other 7 pairs of 5-pin DIN MIDI in and out. We've got the USB host connection, we've got one of the USB B ports, and we've got the Ethernet port. And then we've got the power jack here, and the external power supply is included. That's good. It's one of these ones where you clip on the appropriate country mains fitting. So everyone is catered for. So let's have a quick look at the spec of this. This has very small writing. 9 volt, 2 amp. Yeah, 9V 2A. That's pretty chunky. It feels quite light for 9V 2A, but not Chinesium light. It feels like a fairly decent power supply. We'll find out, I'm sure. General impressions of the quality unit are it is nicely built. It seems to be sheet steel with an aluminium front plate, I'm guessing. Powder coated. The powder coating is slightly crackly, but actually that's quite pleasing. It has a slightly industrial feel to it. The powder coating on the rest of the unit is entirely normal matte black powder coat, which you would expect from a unit like this. It's at least as good as many of the sort of Moto or anyone else's units that I've seen. No fancy over mouldings or anything like this. Just plain old rack unit. The flush mount USB sockets are very nicely done. That's quite nice. Sometimes they can be annoyingly recessed and stuff, but that is actually really nice and flush on the front panel, which is useful. Front panel stuff can always be a problem if it's not very well constructed in terms of how the sockets sit with respect to the front, because if you're going to plug stuff in and out more often, which is obviously the point of having it on a front panel rather than having it always the same around the back. But yeah, and then the ones on the back are just as good, really. USB-A socket might be a little bit more recessed than I'd like, but hopefully that should be fine for stuff not falling out of it. So, as I said, this is replacing some old Mark of the Unicorn gear which I was using previously. Very powerful for what it did, but I had some problems with MIDI sync real-time messages and stuff like that. This, what it needs to do is connect to everything and route everything. Now, the two main things that I want to see from this are A, in terms of the straight up MIDI interface quality, timing issues and that sort of thing should be 0. I understand that there is MIDI jitter, etc. associated with Windows, which is the platform I'll be using it on. But as long as this performs at least as well as, say, the single MIDI on my Sapphire Pro 40, then I'll be fine. I don't have the tools to make specific measurements about that, but usually when I've had problems in the past with MIDI timing, it's been audible. So we'll see how that goes. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to head into the studio, have a little tidy up, rack this up and connect it to all of my MIDI gear, and then what we'll do is we'll have a look at the software, we'll see how it operates, and hopefully make some noises the way they're supposed to be made. Okay, studio time. We're here. It's tidy for what passes for tidy. It'll do. There's a very nice 1U gap there, roughly sort of MIDI interface shaped 1U gap, and we're going to get that plumbed in. We're going to get a bunch of MIDI cables plugged into it. I've already gone through and labelled the cables up for the devices that I want to connect. There are 9 old school MIDI devices in total, and I've got 2 USB devices. The 2 USB devices are going to be a Arturia BeatStep Pro and the big 88-note keyboard, and I've got a little D-Link USB hub as well to connect those with. So hopefully that's going to talk nicely through the host port on the mio10, and what we need to do now is to cable all that stuff up, and see how we get on. And I'm going to do that now. I won't make you watch me do that, because it's going to take a while, and I'll come back once that's done, and we'll see how we're getting on. Okay, this is all hooked up. All of my MIDI devices that I'm interested in controlling are on there, both in terms of the 5-pin DIN MIDI and the USB MIDI. I've got 9 devices attached via 5-pin DIN and 2 via USB, and they're through a small D-Link USB hub. And they do detect correctly. I can show you how that is handled in the software in a moment. So what I want to do now is switch to the screen capture view, and we'll have a look at how this software works and how the configuration is put together and what it looks like. I've done a factory reset of the unit and of the software so that it's in its default configuration, so that you can see what it looks like when it turns up in front of you and what you need to start with to do your own configuration. And there are some steps which pretty much everyone is going to want to do to alter it from the default, but we'll look at that in a minute. So let's switch to the screen capture view here. I'm sorry about the so much the side of my head that you're going to see today. At the moment you're seeing me in beautiful VHSO vision up in the corner of the screen there with my old Panasonic MS40 camera, but it seems to do the trick, so it's fun to play with that old stuff anyway. So anyway, let's have a look at this software, and we'll see how we get on. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the main screen that you're presented with when you first open the software. It does take a little while to detect the device when you first start it up, and subsequently when you start it up, because the nature of the way this works is such that it uses MIDI messages to control the configuration of the routing, etc. in the unit itself. So it has to scan the available MIDI devices on your PC in order to find the right one and find what it's talking to. So there's a little bit of a delay when you start the software up and it says that it's scanning for the device. But then you're presented with this screen, and this is a useful screen because one of the important things it tells you is what IP address the device has got for the MIDI RTP Ethernet based stuff, and that's always a useful thing to know because there's not really any other way of finding it out. But yeah, we've got the basic details of the unit here. Okay, just a quick note about the main menu options on here, the drop downs. You've got open and save presets and open the presets folder. Presets are held as actual files, but if you actually go to open one, it just turns up in a menu. There's a few that I've made here. And then when you actually go to save a preset, you can name it, you can give it a description, you can check which bits of the configuration are in that preset saved, and you can also export it as a MIDI file, which is useful, I'm guessing, as a way to deliver a preset into the device without a PC or similar, or perhaps from a DAW as sysx information, because this unit is programmed via sysx itself. There's a problem that causes, which I'll go into later on. Anyway, that's how the presets work. The device, you can switch devices. I'm guessing if there's more than one Mio device that the iConnectivity iConfig program can talk to, then it will give you a list of those devices and then you can switch between them. Saving current settings will commit those to the memory of the device so that whenever you turn it on, it will have that information in the device. Restoring it from memory will pull the saved configuration in the device back into the software and into the current running memory of the device. Restored factory defaults does what it says on the tin. Reset just is effectively power cycles it. Reset to bootloader mode sets it in the mode for accepting a firmware update. As far as I know, there aren't any firmware updates available at the present moment. So then we've also got auto firmware check frequency, and then reread settings just pulls the running configuration from the unit itself into the iConfig software. We've also got the about here, we've got the website link, which works, the online help, which sadly results in a 404, and the register one, which actually works quite nicely if you've already created the account on the system. So if you've already registered for the support portal on iConnectivity's website, it will then take the serial number through on the URL to register when you use that link, which is a nice touch. So here we have, first of all, a list of the capabilities of the system. Total of 56 MIDI ports, comprising 10 in and out 5-pin DINs, 2 device jacks. Device jacks is its name for PC connections. 16 MIDI devices per device jack, and that means that you get 16 in and 16 out presented to the PC. 1 host jack, so that's for plugging class compliant devices in, which I've got 2 plugged in at the moment, and it's a maximum of 10 MIDI devices across those class compliant devices that you're plugging in. You can also set how many maximum MIDI devices per USB device as well, and both of the devices I've got plugged in have actually got present as 2 devices, so I would need to set this for 2 if I was using this configuration. I've done that on the preset, which I'll load in a bit. Ethernet is 4 ins and 4 outs in total, because you have 4 different sessions and each one of those is a single in and out. There's a couple of things you can enable here, like routing between the multi-port USB devices and running status from the DIN ports. Next section here, naming the ports and enabling input and output. So we've got all the DIN jacks, 10 of those. We've got the USB device jacks, so these are the PC ports, and the second lot of PC ports. Then we've got the USB host jacks, which it's now detected the 2 things which I've attached here. Now it's only put 1 port for each of these, so I would have to go and say we were allowing 2 of those, and then I would be able to reserve these ports on here for those particular devices. So if I go and select these in here, then I do a save current settings, and then I reread settings, you can see it's now reassigned those USB host jack ports to the devices which I've got plugged in. So that all works quite nicely. We've then got the next screen, which is the port routing. So this is basically a big column and row matrix of all of the possible ports, and you can set the routing between them, so you can just enable or disable at any point points on that big matrix to decide which ports are connected to which ports. Now this looks perfectly reasonable. The default DIN 1 on the 5-pin DINs is sent to the input on the DIN 1 on the PC as it's presented. So port 1 on here goes to port 1 as it's seen on the PC, and so on. And it also maps out a bunch of the USB and Ethernet stuff in here as well. Now, that's fine. That's not particularly unreasonable. However, what we have here, which is the routing coming from the DIN ports, so the inputs on the device are coming from my synths, etc., those by default map to everything, which is a bit of a problem, because if I go and press a key on one of my keyboards, it will play on all the other keyboards as well, and on everything else in fact. So, for example, if I press something on my SQ80, it's playing the Sirius, it's playing the drum machine, it's playing it all, because they're all going to each other. At least they don't go to themselves, which cause a horrible MIDI loop, but this is not the best default configuration. It's kind of messy, and it means you have to go and manually undo it when you first start this up. Now, you also get to filter the messages which are going from port to port. So on each port, again, either as input or output, you can filter different types of MIDI data. So pitch bend, real-time events for sync stuff. That's quite a useful one. But you can enable and disable the filtering of those to prevent those messages coming in or going out to those devices that are on those particular ports. Similarly, you can change the MIDI channel of particular messages going in and out of the ports. So again, for input or output on each of these different ports, which you've named earlier on, you can set a channel that should replace any particular incoming channel. So if you want everything coming in on channel 1 to actually present on channel 10, because you're doing something on a drum machine and it's the thing that your controller is sending on 1, then you can do that by remapping channel to channel 10 here appropriately. With the controller filter screen, you can do similar stuff to the MIDI information filter. So this specifically allows you to punch in and out numbered controller messages on particular channels for any of the ports on input or output, which is quite a fine-grained control over the MIDI controller messages. And again, similar to the channel remap, you can actually do controller remapping as well. So if you turn a knob on one device and it's sending it to something else, it's expecting a different controller number to do a particular task, then you can do that. and you can do that over a range of 16 channels on every port input and output as well. So all in all, this is a pretty powerful thing. So what I'll just go and do now is I will open up the preset which I put in here earlier on, and that's got sort of all my device naming and stuff in it. So if we go back to MIDI info here now, you can see that I've got my synths and stuff listed on the DIN connections. I've renamed the PC ports as just PC 1 to 16 because that makes more sense to me. I know how it appears on my PC, and I'm able to better do the routing here by knowing that it's just PC port blah blah blah, because that's how I'm going to use it. I've also got my USB devices set up in here as I want them, and on the routing side I have undone that strange default routing, and for the most part, for most stuff, I've just got it one-to-one, in to out and out to in, from device to PC. So I've just mapped each individual instrument to a single MIDI in and out port pair, and I can use those in my DAW however I want to. I haven't done any filtering at the present moment yet, or any channel remapping or anything like that. The reason I haven't is because, in fact, this doesn't support doing it the way that I need to, but I'll get onto that in a little bit when we come to some conclusions. So I'm just going to save this to my current settings. That all looks good. So, little note here, as we spoke about before, the way that this software programs the mio10 device is via MIDI sysx messages. And that's great, it's a nice way to do it. The only problem being, it requires exclusivity over the port that it's using to do that, which is MIDI port 1 as far as the PC is concerned. So, you can't do this and run your DAW using that port at the same time. They will conflict, and it will say that it can't see the MIDI port. It'll say that it's already taken, or it'll give you some slightly weird red herring message. I'll show you how it appears in FL Studio. So, at the moment it's saying that it's failing. Now the message that I get is there's not enough memory for this task, which is a red herring message. If I subsequently go and now quit out of the iConfig app, it will now allow me to select that, and it will work, and I can renumber it if I need to. Now I've already done the setup of my devices in FL Studio, so I have a setup such that the default brings me up a view where I've got most of my instruments already predefined, and I can just go and play with them, and I can run each of the things I've got attached to this. I can do, and that's all works very nicely. The last two I haven't actually got turned on at the moment, but that works very nicely. The quality of the MIDI connection on this, once you've done the configuration, is fantastic. There's extremely low latency as far as I can tell. I haven't got any specific software to measure that, but to my mind, when I've played stuff through it, there haven't been any latency issues at all. No great amount of jitter or lag or anything like that. And the stability of the device in use as you're doing it without changing the configuration is entirely stable. I've had no problems with that at all. In fact, physically and in terms of general operation, the device is absolutely fantastic. The only thing letting it down at the present moment is the configuration software, but not that badly even. The one thing which I would say about the hardware is that we've got a power / sleep / reset button here. Now, that should really be a MIDI panic button. Because sometimes with these big devices, patchbays and stuff like that, you get a message that something's lost or whatever, and you need to send all notes off to everything. And traditionally, interfaces and patchbays of this sort have had a physical panic button, and I don't think this one does that. So actually, we can try, see what happens. No, doesn't do anything for that. It's just a hold it down to power it off type affair. But yeah, that's the only thing missing physically as far as I'm concerned. They could potentially even change that in the firmware. By and large, everything works just fine. Now, I'm just going to fire up the configuration software just once more and go through a couple of things which I think are niggles, and one thing which I think is a big problem. So, The amount of time that it takes to select a device, that's not really either here nor there. You're not going to be configuring this on the fly all the time, so it's not really that big a deal. Now, well, once we get there, let's say it's not that big a deal and it's just sitting there doing nothing. Okay, cool, we're great. It's in. Make sure that my information is still preserved. Yes, it is. Excellent. Occasionally it will lose the configuration, I found. It's not that big a deal, but it's annoying. And occasionally, if you reconnect a USB class compliant device to this and try and reread the settings whilst it's still setting itself up, this software will just crash. Now, in terms of other niggles, as I've said, there's some stability issues with this software. This is a relatively new piece of software. This is still early doors for this device, and it's a complex set of requirements to be placing on the device. Whilst the amount of processing power actually required to do this is not huge, the complexity of getting all of the right timing and getting all of the right routing and stuff is quite a difficult thing to pull off. This is why there aren't that many of these around for cheap money. It's a difficult problem to solve. The other thing about this is there was no... Well, you can save a preset, you give it a name and type it in, and that's fine and that's grand. But the actual preset open menu is quite nice and gives you a list of them. So I don't see why it doesn't give you that list to update the preset when you're saving it. It seems a bit of an oversight. The defaults in this are clearly stupid. Routing everything to everything to start with. Whilst I can see it's an easy way to see if your messages are going in and out, it's just going to confuse a lot of people, I feel, in terms of when they first plug stuff in. It's just going to make a cacophony when they push a button, and they won't understand why that is necessarily until they get into the guts of the routing of that. I would think the majority of people buying this will start off as just expecting it to be a nice big MIDI interface to their PC or to their iPad or whatever. And I think that could cause some difficulty. However, for me, the one really big thing about this is, whilst you have the routing and the filtering and the channel remapping, where you can select any port and route it to any port, and you can select any port for the remapping, etc., for input and output, what you can't do is route and remap in one go. And what I mean by that is, for example, if I have my key station 88 such that I can switch between 16 channels, and each of those will go to channel 1 on a bunch of different devices. So if I'm outputting channel 2, I would like that to go to channel 1 on the Juno D. If I'm outputting channel 3, I'd like that to go to channel 1 on the Virus. Now, with the way that this is set up to work in this software, that is not possible, because you only have the option to remap on a port-by-port basis, and you can't remap on a channel-by-channel connection basis. What I would need to do is be able to send information from devices to route with the channel remapping, and you just can't do that based on the way this is done. It's a fundamental difference in the way that it would have to be done. Now, what I would expect this to evolve into in order to enable that, because I don't think it's a technical shortcoming, I think it's just an interface shortcoming. What I think would be required is to do all routing, remapping, etc. based on the idea of connections. So you have your big matrix of input and output jacks, and you create connections between them, and those connections are what you create the properties for channel remapping, filtering, etc. based on. And you could do the same for the controller stuff. But I think at the present moment, it's a serious limitation on the software. And it's something which I really, really hope they make changes in, because it definitely limits the functionality for me. It means that I can't make it as easy to use this setup as I would like to from a creative perspective. That said, everything else about this thing, apart from the stability of the software, is grand. It's really good. You get a hell of a lot for your money. This is a bargain basement MIDI interface for what you're getting. There's so much functionality in there. You can connect so many devices to this so easily. I couldn't recommend it enough. What I really want to see is the evolution of the software here, though, because that will turn it into something truly market beating. It will blow everything else out of the water, and there will be no reason to buy anyone else's MIDI interface or patchbay if this thing gains the capability to do that connectivity based routing and filtering. This is a great piece of kit, and I'm very glad that I paid the money for it, and I think anyone who's looking for a serious bit of MIDI interface kit should seriously consider these guys' hardware, because they do some smaller ones as well, and the smaller ones have some of the same capabilities in terms of being able to attach class compliant MIDI devices on the USB, etc. It's in its infancy at the present moment, and I really want to see these guys do well, because they're producing some really nice hardware. The documentation is well written. Clearly they're a relatively new company, and some of the general infrastructure which builds around these things hasn't come quite to be there yet. But they're very good in forums. Everyone who I've seen talking to them on places like Gearsluts and those places, there's loads of interaction with their user base. So I have really high hopes for these guys, and I really have high hopes for this device in terms of it's already simplified my workflow. It's already made things better. It's already been very stable for the stuff that I want to do. If it can get to that point where you can do that connection-based routing, it will do everything that I need to in a MIDI device, and nothing has ever done that before. So yeah, this is a really great device. I've been very happy to play with this, and it's given me some challenges in terms of understanding where the little foibles are in the software and stuff. But on the whole, it's fantastic. There's really nothing anywhere near as good as this out there in terms of a big MIDI interface and patchbay. I'd be very happy to recommend this to anyone, especially if they've got a little bit of time to put up with learning how to work the foibles of the software. And I'm sure those things are going to get fixed in due course anyway. I have every confidence that they'll sort that stuff out. I just hope and pray that they do connection-based routing. There's going to be more to learn about this thing. So what I would suggest is, if you guys have got any questions, if you've got anything that you would like me to try out, any particular issues, if you've got one of these or similar, and do you want me to try something out to replicate an issue, anything like that, if there's a way that I can measure things like jitter and latency and that sort of thing in a useful way to you, then let me know. I will be happy to do a follow-up to this with any specific tests or questions or anything like that. Just give me a shout in the comments, and we'll take it from there. Okay, with that, I think I'm going to stop this video, unset up more of my equipment, and actually make some noises. See you guys later. Have a good one.